My subject is, can housing and planning help? Now, I think it's fair to say that an awful lot of people think that levelling up is fundamentally about a housing situation and the crisis in housing across the country. Well, I think most of us here would think it's very, very much more broad, but also that housing is a major constraint on the sorts of things which we've been talking about up till now. So can housing and planning help? I'm going to be a bit awkward and say yes, but in a way you might not expect. First of all, just to clear away certain things, what do we mean by levelling up? It's been interpreted as being north versus south. It's been interpreted as being London and the southeast versus the rest of the country. And it's beginning to feel as though we've got two countries now. In fact, we've got an additional country because London is seen as being separate and at some level bad, which is rather difficult. Or more generally, it's about concentrations of disadvantage anywhere in the country. Is it about opportunities that are not being taken? That's what Gove stressed yesterday at the Select Committee, but it was about untaken opportunity, which is quite an interesting basis. Is it more about resources being underutilized? Well, we're saying that certain resources are simply just not there. But the potential opportunities not being recognized or developed, and we're not taking full account of the path dependency and the need for synergy. Or is it simply, which many people fear, simply about redistribution, which would mean levelling up must mean levelling down somewhere else? Optimists, and we're obviously all optimists here, that's why we're listening or doing or speaking, see the possibility of a win-win situation, but that's not going to happen easily. And it hasn't happened in earlier times when we've tried to do this. We've sometimes had some success. And it is inherently place-based, and we don't need to stress that more perhaps than we've done so far today. No single initiative can make a really major difference of its own. We've got to do different factors together. We've got to build health, education, skills, transport, housing. But fundamentally, we've got to get more out of less, and that means productivity. But I do think that it would be not suitable to say that it doesn't depend upon government putting in seed corn and ending guessing winners. And government has been particularly bad at guessing winners in the past. So the devolved authorities, etc., are going to have to help a great deal on that. It's about local government structures and funding. But where does housing fit into this? I think that an awful lot of people would argue that the way that government policy is running at the moment, it's hindering, not helping. And I think this is really important. The numbers game, the 300,000 which have got to be produced, the 80-20 rule by which we put money where the affordability is worst, is actually concentrating the investment in London and the southeast, and the affordability and the numbers do the same thing. So I think, and this has been said a number of times this week, for the first time for a long while, that the numbers game is not helpful of itself. The second reason it's not helpful is it raises enormous political tensions, which we keep seeing in the housing context, and the way that government responds to those political tensions is not necessarily good for the longer term. So in the south, we're desperate about the loss of green belt in particular, while in the north, there's a really strong wish to build more and to improve conditions in that sense. Now, there was a report brought out by Building Back Better yesterday, day before yesterday, which says, well, we need to be able to move the housing to the north because, sorry, not to the north, but to the areas which we're dealing with, because people are going to go for the opportunities there, and therefore there will be far more people living in these areas, and therefore the housing needs to be built there implicitly rather than in the southeast, where there is a clear and current problem. And they also talk about modern methods of construction and the importance of this, which again is a long-term issue. So I do think the allocation of housing infrastructure funding, which is also an 80-20 thing, is based on affordability criteria, reinforces the concentration of investment. And if we look at the things which are already underway and in the plans, like the ARC from Oxford to Cambridge, the vast possibility is that that is really going to do things south of the ARC, unless we work consciously to move it out to a much greater extent than we have at the moment. But government responds to the political tensions which have been there and said, oh dear, we can't build too many houses in the nice southeast. So the political decision has been to move the housing requirements into central cities, where it is quite enormously difficult to build that sort of numbers because it just isn't the suitable land. So London is meant to double their output levels. Absolutely no way is that going to happen. And I think that the same is true for other cities. So where I think levelling up does fit in is in improving the existing stock, and that the increasing emphasis on net zero will be enormously helpful because it is inherently across the country and it can bring jobs across the country. And one of the building better thing is to build skills bases for the construction industry across the country. There needs to be new technology, new skills, scale economies. Given the current poor quality of housing in many of the left behind areas, there's a significant health and well-being benefits to coming from improving the housing stock. We spend too much time worrying about the physicality of the housing stock and not about whether people living in it can be helped to need less health services, to be able to develop education very much better. Lots of kids live in housing where they can't be really able to do the best they can. We think too narrowly about what the benefits might be. But the important thing is this all requires funding. And where is the funding coming from? Productivity benefits will come in the future, but they won't come immediately. And the National Housing Federation says we need 36 billion just to improve the housing association sector up to basic standards. What about planning? Well, the simplified system, which you may know about or you may not, which has been put out last year by the government, which is now on hold because Mr. Gove wishes to rethink it, is a simplified system which speeds up housing development. It's almost its only objective, and incentivizes more investment across the country. But it does place some emphasis on brownfield sites, and that could help the industrial areas quite a lot. The proposed substitution of an infrastructure levy rather than the Section 106 SIL development contributions is based on the value of new development. Well, the values, as we were shown to begin with, are mostly in the south. So this is going to provide money for the south, or at least for higher valued areas, including those in the north. It is not going to provide money of itself for the more deprived areas. And indeed, it is ruled out that the money can be transferred from one local authority to another. So it's a massive no-no in terms of the way in which we might actually level up. So how could housing help leveling up? Well, this is where I've come apart in terms of what I think should happen, but which has not the slightest chance of happening, I feel. Reform council tax and redistribute the money in the ways that council tax has always been redistributed, but with a hell of a lot more to do it with. At the moment, the way that council tax is organised. Richer people or people in better housing pay proportionately less council tax than people in poorer housing, in area by area. And secondly, council tax hasn't increased significantly over the last 30 years. So it's starved local authorities of the funding which they need to build infrastructure to make the system work. And it's worsened income and wealth distribution. And of course, when you do build infrastructure, what happens? House prices go up, but we do not tax that increase. And so we get higher house prices rather than better funding regimes. So it can only be changed by changing the tax system, something which we have been trying to do for 30 odd years and we are not succeeding. It's politically unacceptable to modify council tax, even though it's a complete nonsense at the moment. I've got a couple of quick examples there. I moved in 35 years ago to the house which I'm in. I pay £200 more tax on council tax than I did 35 years ago. Complete and utter nonsense. And equally, my colleague who lives next door to a castle or fairly near a castle pays exactly the same council tax as the castle with the grounds does. It needs reforming. There is money there and it can be used to help the levelling up approach. So there needs to be much more redistribution, but it can't be done all at once, and it will be incredibly unpopular, and therefore it probably will not happen. But it would devolve funding to where it needs to be, and it would help all of these other ideas which have been coming over this evening. So what's the message? Current policies in housing are worsening inequalities and making it much harder for disadvantaged areas to improve. Concentrating on housing numbers and only on housing numbers does nothing to stabilize house prices, reinforces inequalities, lots of potential opportunities in terms of new technologies, higher skills, but they need seed corn, they need funding. And it needs stronger regional and local powers and money to help generate the necessary synergies. So we need a new sort of funding, and the only one I can see is council tax. And I'll stop.